They thought they could block my road and trap me in. What they didn't know? I built the only bridge in. That's where the story begins. Not with routine maintenance or good faith repairs, but with yellow tape stretched across asphalt, an HOA sign hammered into the ground like a warning to trespassers. It was a spectacle designed to send a message. Control had arrived. Neighbors gathered quickly, confusion spreading faster than the heat shimmering off the pavement. Mothers gripped their children's hands, worried about how they'd get to school. Delivery drivers idled on the shoulder, staring at the blockade as if a wall had risen overnight. An elderly man shook his head, muttering about medication he needed from town. And through it all, the HOA leader stood at the center like a conductor of chaos, barking about necessary repairs and enforcement of safety codes. But everyone knew what it really was. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about community. It was about power. The kind that thrives on reminding people how small they are when rules are wielded as weapons. Each word from her lips dripped with arrogance, each gesture toward the taped-off road daring anyone to challenge her authority. I watched from my porch, calm against the storm of panic around me. The road they blocked wasn't just pavement, it was the only artery that carried life in and out of our neighborhood. Without it, families couldn't reach jobs, students couldn't reach schools, ambulances couldn't reach the sick. Cutting it off wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a chokehold. Phones came out, recording every second. Neighbors argued, pleaded, demanded answers, but the board members flanking their leader only folded their arms, satisfied with the disruption they had unleashed. To them, this was proof of their dominance. Shut down the road, watch the people bow. What they didn't know was that beneath their feet, beyond their tape, stood something they had overlooked entirely, the bridge. The one I had built when developers cut corners. The one I had poured my sweat, my time, my money into. The one that didn't belong to them. So I let them gloat, let them preen for the cameras, because I knew the truth. And what happened next left the entire neighborhood stunned. The HOA's obsession with control had been brewing for years. It started with parking spots, evolved into curfews on trash cans, and eventually swelled into a fixation on who could drive where and when. They convinced themselves that authority wasn't just about bylaws. It was about ownership of every inch of pavement. And in their minds, the road closure was the ultimate proof that their dominion stretched beyond backyards and mailboxes. The arrogance was staggering. Standing behind their flimsy barricade, the HOA board acted like generals at the gates of a fortress. Their leader delivered lines rehearsed like a campaign speech, declaring that the road was unsafe and unfit for community use until the association gave its approval. But beneath the polished words was the unmistakable sneer of control. They wanted people to panic, to beg, to submit. To them, blocking the road wasn't a about repairs at all. It was about reminding the neighborhood who supposedly ran things. What they didn't consider was the real human cost. This was the only access point in and out. Parents relied on it to get their kids to school on time. Nurses and teachers in the community needed it to make their shifts. Delivery drivers depended on it to bring groceries, medicine, even oxygen tanks for the elderly couple at the end of the cul-de-sac. Each person's livelihood ran across that strip of asphalt and the bridge beyond it. Cutting it off wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Neighbors began to feel the chokehold tighten almost immediately. A woman carrying grocery bags was stopped by tape that hadn't been there the day before. A contractor cursed under his breath as he realized his crew could not reach the site they were scheduled to repair. Kids on bicycles turned around, confused, asking why they couldn't ride down the road they'd used every day of their lives. Panic simmered, and that was exactly what the HOA wanted. This was no longer a debate about bylaws or landscaping guidelines. This was about freedom of movement, about whether a handful of board members could weaponize access to control the lives of dozens of families. It was values versus tyranny, plain and simple. And the more the HOA postured, the more the tension grew. I watched the scene unfold, calm as always, though my neighbors were trembling. I understood their fear. It was real, and it was justified. But I also knew something they didn't. The barricade was built on arrogance, not authority. And arrogance is always blind. The HOA thought they had trapped us, that by taping off one road they had seized absolute power. What they didn't realize was that the very lifeline they were trying to strangle was never theirs to begin with. It was mine. And the moment they tried to enforce their rule, they were stepping onto ground that would not hold them. The leader of the HOA was the kind of person who mistook a clipboard for a crown. She didn't just enforce the rules, she embodied them, or at least she believed she did. Entitled and self-righteous, she carried herself as though she had been elected to Congress rather than chosen to preside over a handful of suburban streets. Every time she opened her mouth, it was less a conversation than a decree. Her reign began with petty projects, each one framed as a noble mission. First, she declared war on fences. Too high, too low, too modern, too rustic, none of them were safe from her critique. Families who thought they settled into their dream homes were suddenly forced to repaint or rebuild because their fences violated an interpretation of rules that seemed to change by the week. Then came the battle of the paint. One poor family spent thousands to cover their cheerful yellow house with a dull beige after receiving a notice claiming their color disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Another was told their shutters were unapproved, even though the very same shade decorated the HOA president's own windows. Contradictions never bothered her. They only reinforced her sense of invincibility. Trash cans became her next crusade. She launched inspections to ensure bins weren't visible from the street, as though a glimpse of plastic might collapse property values overnight. Residents returning from 12-hour shifts found warning slips taped to their doors, accusing them of disrespecting community standards. For her, these small battles weren't about cleanliness or order. They were about control, about reminding people who held the whip hand. And now, inevitably, she had set her sights on infrastructure. Closing the road was her grandest project yet, a performance designed to elevate her authority to the level of life and death. She claimed it was about safety, but everyone could see the irony. By blocking the only route in and out, she created the very danger she claimed to be preventing. Ambulances could be delayed, deliveries disrupted, lives endangered. Yet in her mind, this contradiction wasn't weakness, it was power. She could bend logic, and the neighborhood had to follow. That arrogance was both absurd and believable. Absurd, because no rational person would equate property values with padlocked roads. Believable, because we had all seen her do it before. Twisting rules, rewriting them mid-sentence, enforcing them with an iron fist against anyone who dared resist. She wrapped herself in the language of community standards and collective safety. But beneath the slogans was a hunger for control, pure and simple. The most dangerous part was how convincing she could be. At HOA meetings, she wielded statistics no one had verified and brandished safety codes no one had read. Some neighbors nodded along, too exhausted or intimidated to challenge her. Others rolled their eyes in silence, knowing resistance would only bring the next fine or citation. That blend of fear and fatigue allowed her to thrive. But arrogance always carries a blind spot. She had built her reputation on small victories, each one convincing her she was untouchable. She believed she could close roads just as easily as she banned shutters or fined trash cans. What she never considered was that this time, she wasn't playing with aesthetics or paperwork. This time, she was tampering with something essential, something far beyond her reach. And this time, their arrogance set them up for a fall unlike any before. I was never the kind of man who sought the spotlight. My life had been built on the rhythm of quiet work, steady hands, and the belief that dignity outlasts noise. When people describe me, they don't use words like loud or flashy. They say I'm calm, measured, the kind of neighbor who waves from the porch, lends a tool without being asked, and doesn't raise his voice unless there's a reason. That calm wasn't a personality quirk. It was survival, shaped by a journey that had demanded patience and grit every step of the way. I came to this country with little more than calloused palms and a determination that my children would know stability I had never seen. The path wasn't easy. I worked long hours on construction sites, taking the shifts no one else wanted, learning every detail about concrete, steel, and timber. I studied while others rested, asked questions while others looked away. Slowly, I turned sweat into skill, and that skill into a reputation. I wasn't just another worker, I was someone who could build something to last. That reputation mattered years ago when the neighborhood was first being developed. The contractors hired by the HOA's chosen developers cut corners. They wanted profits, not permanence. The access road was poured thin, the drainage incomplete, and most dangerously, the bridge leading into the community was treated like an afterthought. I knew the risks. One heavy storm, one flash flood, and the connection could crumble. So I did what no one else dared. I stepped in. With my own time, my own resources, and my own sweat, I reinforced what they had left weak. I secured permits the developers had ignored, drafted designs that met real engineering standards, and laid down steel and stone that would outlast the neighborhood's paper rules. It wasn't about recognition. It was about ensuring my family, and every family who came after, could cross safely, no matter the weather. Quietly, legally, that bridge became mine, stamped with my name, bound by the paperwork everyone else had overlooked. I never boasted about it. To me, the bridge wasn't a trophy, it was a promise. A promise that if you put in honest work, if you sacrificed comfort for security, your family would be safe. And I had sacrificed plenty. Nights away from my children, money I could have spent elsewhere, energy drained until my body ached. But I looked at what I had built and felt pride, not the hollow pride of dominance, but the grounded pride of knowing I had given my family something real. That pride didn't fade when the HOA turned its gaze on me. Their fines, their threats, their arrogance, it all washed against me like waves against rock, because deep down I carried a knowledge they could never touch. They dealt in paper, I dealt in steel. They enforced rules written on clipboards. I enforced safety etched into stone. So, when they gathered their tape and barricades, convinced they had severed the lifeline of the neighborhood, I didn't flinch. They had forgotten the history written beneath their feet. They had overlooked the hands that built the foundation of their control. So when they blocked the road, I didn't panic. I remembered what they had forgotten. Who built it? The HOA gathered the neighborhood like a jury called to witness their grand performance. Folding chairs were dragged onto the roadside, clipboards handed out, and the barricade stood like a stage set for a play no one had asked to watch. Their leader stood at the center, her voice sharp and theatrical, announcing, "Effective immediately, this road is closed for safety repairs. Until further notice, no one may enter or exit without board approval." The words dropped like stones into the crowd. Neighbors shifted uneasily, whispering about commutes, about children who had tests in the morning, about deliveries scheduled to arrive that very afternoon. But the HOA president didn't hear them, or perhaps didn't care. She raised her voice, reveling in the silence that followed. "These measures are not up for debate. Safety comes first. The code requires compliance, and compliance will be enforced." Her board members nodded solemnly, as though quoting scripture. She listed off imaginary violations: substandard concrete, unstable supports, imminent collapse. Each phrase was meant to terrify, to paint herself as the savior guarding her people from disaster. Yet everyone knew the bridge had held steady for years through floods, storms, and daily traffic. The only thing unstable was the authority she was clinging to. I stood near the back, arms folded, expression calm. I let her words echo, let the crowd stew in the tension she was building. This was her stage, and she was performing with all the arrogance of someone who believed no one could upstage her. The louder she grew, the more frantic her gestures became, the clearer it was that she wasn't protecting anyone. She was cornering them with fear. Neighbors began to protest, though their voices shook. "How will I get to work?" one man demanded. "My mother has dialysis tomorrow," another shouted. The leader silenced them with a wave of her hand, as if dismissing children. "The board will authorize exceptions as necessary," she declared, "but only through the proper channels. Until then, no one moves." The frustration boiled over. Phones recorded every second, some neighbors crying, others furious, but all of them powerless before the barricade and her commands. She mistook their fear for obedience, their silence for respect. She thought she had won. I stayed quiet, watching, waiting. Every dictator digs their own grave when given enough rope, and she was doing it in full view of the neighborhood. Each threat, each smug assurance, each promise of fines and penalties only deepened the hole she would soon fall into. Finally, she made her grand move. With exaggerated flair, she lifted a heavy padlock, swung it around the chain strung across the barricade, and snapped it shut. The metallic clink echoed like a verdict. She turned to the crowd with a satisfied smile, convinced she had sealed her victory. Then came the moment. They padlocked the road, thinking they owned it. The padlock clicked into place, and for a moment the HOA leader stood taller than ever, basking in the uneasy silence. She raised her chin, ready to deliver another lecture about order and safety. But before she could, I stepped forward. My neighbors parted instinctively, their eyes following me as though something inevitable had finally arrived. I carried a slim folder in my hand, worn at the edges but solid, filled with papers that bore more weight than her clipboard ever could. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. My voice cut through the summer air with calm precision. "You've made a mistake," she scoffed, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Another complaint? Another excuse? The board has spoken." I opened the folder and lifted out the first sheet, a stamped, signed record from the county office. "This is the permit for the bridge that connects this community to the rest of the world," I said evenly. "It bears my name." I held up the next page, blueprints inked with my hand-drawn notes. "This is the design, my design. Every beam, every bolt, every foundation poured under my supervision." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones rose higher, capturing every word. The HOA leader's smirk faltered, just slightly, as I continued. "And this," I added, unfolding the final page, "is the deed confirming ownership of the structure itself. Not the HOA's, not the developers. Mine. The only bridge into this neighborhood does not belong to you." Her mouth opened, but no words came. She glanced to her board members for support, but they suddenly seemed very interested in their shoes. Murmurs spread among the neighbors, disbelief at first, then dawning relief, then laughter. A teenager shouted, "She blocked off his own bridge!" The crowd erupted, their tension breaking into cheers and mocking applause. I looked directly at her, holding her gaze steady. My voice stayed calm, but the weight of the words landed like a hammer. "You can block your signs all day, but the only bridge into this neighborhood, that's mine." The roar of the crowd grew louder, gasps, laughter, even clapping. Someone chanted my line back, and others joined in, their voices carrying over the barricade she had thought would silence us all. The HOA leader's face drained of color. She reached for her clipboard, flipping pages as if the rules she'd written could somehow erase the reality in front of her. But no bylaw could override the ink of county records or the steel of the bridge beneath our feet. Her mask of authority cracked, and everyone watching saw it crumble. The stage she had built for her victory had turned into her public unmasking. And though the cheers filled the air, I knew the story wasn't over, because the humiliation had only just begun. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. What had started as tension and fear had transformed into laughter, relief, and a kind of unity no one had expected. Neighbors who once avoided each other's eyes now shared knowing smiles. The scene of the padlocked road, my quiet reveal, and her stunned silence was replayed in whispers on sidewalks, in chuckles over morning coffee, and in conversations at the school bus stop. Then came the memes, screenshots of her red face, frozen mid-gesture, spread like wildfire online. Someone captioned it, HOA blocked road they didn't even own. Another edited a video loop of her snapping the padlock shut, overlaying it with circus music. Within hours, clips were posted on local forums and shared across social media. Strangers from outside the community laughed at the absurdity, while residents felt a rare sense of empowerment. Inside the boardroom, chaos replaced certainty. Meetings, once dominated by her booming voice, now dissolved into bickering and excuses. Some members tried to distance themselves, claiming they had never supported the closure. Others stayed silent, unwilling to tie their reputations to her sinking ship. The leader who once wielded fear like a weapon now found herself isolated, credibility shredded. For the community, the shift was unmistakable. People who had cowered under citations and fines now felt emboldened. They stopped worrying about trash can placement, about porch lights, about the petty rules that had dictated their lives. And when they looked at me, it wasn't with suspicion or avoidance. It was with gratitude. I became the neighbor who had not only stood firm, but revealed the truth hiding in plain sight. Respect replaced distance. Admiration replaced fear. The story had escaped the confines of one neighborhood. It became a parable of arrogance undone, of quiet strength outlasting loud intimidation. Yet even as neighbors laughed and celebrated, I knew the lesson was deeper than paperwork and property lines, because the true meaning of this story isn't about bridges at all. When the laughter faded and the barricades were cleared away, what remained was not just a neighborhood free of tape and padlocks. What remained was a lesson carved deeper than concrete, one that no ordinance or bylaw could erase. This had never truly been about roads or bridges. It had been about dignity, preparation, and truth, standing firm against arrogance. The HOA believed their strength came from loud voices, threats, and paper rules. But real strength is quieter. It's the patience to endure without breaking, the foresight to prepare long before a crisis comes, and the calm to reveal the truth when arrogance tries to drown it out. That's why the board failed. They mistook fear for power, but fear crumbles the moment knowledge steps into the light. Bullies always build on shaky ground. They rely on intimidation because they have nothing else. And when confronted not with more shouting, but with unshakable calm and undeniable facts, they collapse under the weight of their own noise. That was the real revelation for my neighbors, that you don't need to scream to win. You need only to stand tall, to hold your ground with dignity, and to let arrogance expose itself. The bridge may have been built of steel and stone, but the real bridge that carried us forward was something stronger. It was the bridge of dignity, the quiet strength that connects justice to truth, preparation to perseverance, neighbor to neighbor. That bridge is harder to build, but once it stands, no one can tear it down. So the next time someone tries to trap you, to cut off your path with arrogance and threats, remember this. Sometimes the strongest bridge isn't built of steel. It's built of dignity. They tried to block the road, convinced they could trap me and the entire community. But what they forgot, what they never even considered, was who built the bridge in the first place. That single truth unraveled their arrogance and reminded everyone watching that real power doesn't come from loud threats or padlocks. It comes from preparation, from patience, from dignity that refuses to bend. The HOA thought they could close off access, but in the end, it was their authority that was cut off. Justice, dignity, and truth proved stronger than any barricade. And that's the lesson I want carried beyond our neighborhood. Arrogance collapses, but dignity stands. Fear silences, but truth speaks louder. No matter how high the walls of petty tyranny rise, they will always fall when confronted with calm resolve and the courage to stand tall. If this story spoke to you, if you've faced your own battles against arrogance, if you believe in dignity over noise, in truth over intimidation, then join us. Like this video, share it with others, and subscribe. Together we can build more than bridges. We can build a movement that refuses to live under petty tyranny and chooses dignity instead.